Hi, and welcome back, everyone, to Dogs Do Speak podcast with Connie Spence. Today, unfortunately, Samantha Wayland is not with us. She's just got back from Cyprus, where she was working with rescue dogs. So she's at home now recovering. But we do have wonderful Emily who's joined us, and today's topic is going to be about resource guarding. So please hit that button so you don't miss any episodes that come up on the YouTube channel of Dogs Do Speak. Emma, hello and welcome, and thank you for coming along to the Dogs Do Speak YouTube podcast channel. How are you?
It's fun. Thanks for having me. It's always nice to chat with you.
Oh, great, great, great. Today's topic is that dreaded resource guarding. Um, and it's a huge topic. And I know you're the right person to help us out here. What is it? How does it rear its ugly head?
I think I've kind of broadened my perspective on what resource guarding is in the last sort of 15 years or so. And for some of those things, we haven't actually got anything new or any real new data. So we've really been finding our way, I think, from a practitioner's point of view. So because I deal quite a lot with dogs with big feelings about things, and I work with lots of wonderful colleagues who share their experience as well, I think I've really been kind of thinking that, okay, animals and ourselves included, because we are the champion resource guarders. We are very good at resource guarding. And I think thinking about it as a set of behaviors among social animals in terms of the quality of reinforcers that are available helps. So we forget that we're doubly blessed with dogs because most dogs don't do what a lot of other animals do. So one of the things is that most animals who've been tested don't like it where the quality of reinforcers is downgraded. None of us like having to like switch from the good sandwiches to the rubbish sandwiches. None of us like, one of my favorites, it's Edward Tolman, who was a psychologist in the 1940s and onwards in America, kind of like a rival in some ways to Skinner with purposive behavior. And he made an observation in the 1930s of a lady monkey who was expecting to get fruit. She was expecting to get grapes, and she got lettuce. And she threw the lettuce on the floor in disgust and refused to eat it and went off and had a sulk in the corner. And he was like, quite like, oh, this is interesting. And in the last sort of 100 years, we've done lots more research on different species of animals, which shows most animals don't like downshifts in the quality of reinforcers. They'd rather have been paid poorly all along and accept it, but yet have them on a high tariff and you switch them to the low and they do not like that, and they'll there's lots of frustration and redirected behavior and so on. And dogs, when they're tested, tend to give very mixed results on this. Wolves as well and other canids, so coyotes, dingoes, and so on have been tested. And they're kind of like, okay, so we forget that dogs are special and dogs are not like us, that when our pay is downgraded, we're out on the streets rioting and in France we've got the gilets jaunes complaining about things. Somebody says that you've got to do 2 more years in work and you won't be able to retire, and we're out on the streets and we're up in arms about it and so on. And monkeys too, with their sulking in the corner if they don't get banana. So we've got that, and we forget that that's one reason dogs are special. But that's not to say not all dogs, that is to say not all dogs, because not all dogs do feel okay with the downshift in the quality of stuff, or the potential downshift in quality, the threat of that. And then the other one where dogs amaze me is most animals don't like being cheated and will redirect frustration onto the person that's cheating them. Dogs, again, like other canids also, are less bothered about that. So if they've got that beautiful experiment where they tested dogs, where they could see a dog next to them, and Daniel Mills has talked about this recently as well, so I know it's on his mind too. They tested two dogs together where one dog is being paid a high quality dog nosh for doing a trick, and the other is being paid like a really skimpy, rubbish, floury biscuit. And the dog keeps on doing the behavior. And that's amazing because most species are like, nope. We've got that wonderful Franz de Waal video with the capuchin monkeys where the monkey have to pass a token through the bar. So the researcher gives them a token, they have to pass it back to her and they get like a reward, a reinforcer for doing so. And there's two working next to each other. And so she does the first one. They get cucumber on the first round. Monkeys are okay about cucumber, but it's not brilliant. The next one, she gives one of the monkeys a grape, which they really like, and gives the other one a cucumber. And the monkey takes that cucumber and he throws it out, and it's like, I'm not having that. That's this, and refuse and won't participate. He trials one more time, and there's issues there about status as well. So some like lower status primates will accept higher status primates having the better reading quality reinforcers than they do, but not all. And dogs don't like most dogs are just kind of, that's okay. They're getting better pay than me. Fine. Which is amazing to me, but we forget that not all dogs. So some dogs will experience that. Oh, I don't want to lose, I don't even want to feel the threat of having a reinforcer downgraded, which it might mean if you're coming over to take something away from me. And I really don't like the person who's threatening to do that, or the individual, the dog, cat, whatever. And the other one is that some dogs can have feelings about other animals getting things that they don't have, or other individuals in the home getting things that they don't get to access. And I think we forget that it really isn't all dogs. So when we talk about where does resource guarding come from? Well, it's just natural in social species that we have issues about having to share stuff that is reinforcing to us. Whether that's mates, whether that's food, whether that's security, whether that's sharing our bed. And you know, all of us got locks on our doors and would really not appreciate it if a stranger came in and got into bed with us just to share our bed in the evening. So where we kind of like dogs are dogs are special because a lot of them will put up with that nonsense.
So, are we sort of saying then it could become a genetical thing, a genetics?
It's just like an inherited behavior that's been useful to hold on to things that are valuable to you, you know?
Mhm.
And that goes across mammalian species that are social. So, obviously, if you're not social, then it doesn't matter to you. But territoriality might also be a factor in that and holding on to resources of value and the places that those resources are delivered, but also maybe relationships and activities that you're doing. So, for me, where we're talking about resource guarding, I think obviously has got heritable qualities because we are going to see it in some breeds more than we see it in others. And some dogs definitely feel more okay about it. But I think it's one of those things that's obviously more complicated than that because there's learning histories. You know, the first dog I adopted as an adult was a little Cocker Spaniel who was, she was literally on the table in the vet surgery to be euthanized. And I'd had spaniels. I lived with spaniels growing up. And I was weeping on behalf of this dog, and the vet said, "Can you take her?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." You know, we already had a dog at the time, but she'd bitten four children, and it was a serious thing then, and I didn't have the experience that I've got now. But she came with a raft of notes from veterinary behaviorists in the US. She'd been adopted over into, she'd been imported into Spain and then France. A raft of notes documenting her behavior since she was very, very young. And I never saw those behaviors directed towards human beings in our house because we had a different way of living. And she didn't do it. She lived with about 50 dogs because after she arrived, I then became a serial fosterer of dogs, an adopter of dogs. And she only ever showed it to two other dogs. And
All
her
right.
dying act, her literal dying act, was to tell one of my other dogs, "You're not sharing the Emma. I'm dying. I'm getting my pet in it." And I told one of my Mali girls, she just was like, "You get away from here. I may be dying, but you know, I'm not sharing. If you think there's petting for share, it's not happening." And so for me, where we're talking about, I think obviously there are inherited aspects, particularly from the mammal kingdom and the social mammal kingdom, and why wolves and coyotes and dingoes and so on tend to be a little bit more okay with it. but there are things that we don't yet understand about related to status. Like it may be that younger animals or those of less status in a group will kind of accept the older or the getting theirs in first. But even wolf parents will give food to the children first and make sure that they're well fed and will tolerate children taking the youngsters taking things from them. So there are complicated aspects about relationships as well, and then the environment and the situation. So I like to think that yes, we've all got the capacity to do it, but behavior is radically, it's rooted in the situation. And if we change aspects of the situation, then quite often we just don't see the behavior. So maybe that's just like we've all got capacity to be resource guarders, but it depends on the environments in which we live. Like if we feel under threat, we're going to have more locks on our doors. We're going to have, I learned about the stealing of catalytic converters the other day. My brother said at his factory in Birmingham, they'd got some young fella come along to clip off the catalytic converters. And my brother ran out, like, what are you doing? And the guy's like, I'm trying to earn a living. It's like, what? And then they had the whole fleet fitted with like things to protect the catalytic. There are things out there that I don't even know I need to be afraid of having stolen. And then when it becomes an issue, then we start, getting CCTV, putting more locks on our doors, getting weapons, getting big dogs to scare people away, putting protectors on our catalytic converters, and getting dislocks and scorpions fitted to our vehicles, and all kinds of manner of things. But that depends on the level of threat that there is in the environment, and if we tend to feel like we're not being very threatened, then we wouldn't exhibit those behaviours. So. I
So,
guess
so,
that.
so the environment plays a massive role here,
Mm,
a huge role, dependent on how the environment is or what the environment is saying to the dog that it feels that something is going to happen. Obviously,
yes.
going to be responsive to it. So let's look at the pet
And it
dog.
depends on the quality of the reinforcers and what that means to the individual as well. You know,
Absolutely.
I might not feel bothered about my neighbours stealing my bags of dog poo that I have hanging around the garden, but I would feel very upset if they stole a flower pot. So I think that also factors into it.
Yeah, because it's got to have some form of a value for us to want
Yes.
to fight for it. Yeah.
Yes.
Hence why you sort of said some dogs are not that bothered about certain things,
Yes.
and some will still work for the low level value of kibble or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's continuous.
Yeah, but other
Mm.
animals won't do that. If they can see an animal being paid more than they are, they'll stop. And dogs know. They had to even check that the dogs could see in that experiment. Do you know that the other guy is getting more than you? And the dog's like, yeah, I just don't care. And they thought that was just dogs, but it's not. It is other canids as well.
Okay, see, that's something I learned there. I didn't realise that all the other canids have that going on, but thinking about it now, of course, they must do. They
Yeah. Well,
must.
they can share one big food resource and one big sleeping area sometimes. So there's more sharing going on, isn't there? I think. Um, so perhaps they're better at tolerating when somebody else gets something juicy and they don't.
So, can we as humans trigger it in any way?
Inadvertently, I mean, I don't think anybody would want to do it on purpose, would they? And I don't like to think that I find it very hard to blame ourselves. So when we know better, we do better, don't we? And like I'd always been brought up with spaniels, so we didn't wander around with food and sandwiches because you would lose that sandwich. At my nana's house, we had because she had a little American cocker like I had Tilly. We all pushed our chairs under at the table when we finished, or even before we started, because the dog would get up and would eat. And sometimes you wouldn't know because he was quite crafty and liked certain things. So once she'd made a lemon meringue pie and he ate all of the meringue off the top, but the lemon was clearly disgusting, so he left that. And she'd put out prawn salad and he'd eaten the prawns but left the avocado and the lettuce. So and he couldn't even know he was always in there. But we adapted our behavior around him. I mean, he had some other things that he didn't like he was quite nervous little dog. He was adopted as well, and he would urinate sometimes. Like Tilly would also do the same thing. Was quite scared of people, really. So we made provisions for that, and like when visitors arrived, he'd go out into the back garden. And then he would come in once he'd had a wee outside, and so we were very much about how we adapted around our spaniels, like owning a red cocker in the 1980s, the dog that we had in our home. You'd think from reading historical reports about cocker rage and the prevalence of this in red cocker spaniels and in the 1970s and 80s in particular, you'd think my parents had brought like a loaded gun into the house and let the kids play with it. But we just had respectful behaviors around those kind of like situations. And I think that does make a difference.
Mhm.
But we can't explain it. Like Tilly, like I said, she lived with 50 other dogs and she did not care about the majority of those other dogs. She had beef with Amigo. I don't know why. Amigo never took anything from her, but she just didn't like the cut of his jib. And there was something he did about the way that he moved him, that she's just like, you're gonna steal something from me. I just know it. That she just didn't trust him. And I don't know why he never did a stick of bother to her. And also with Flicker, my elderly Malinois. And one of my endearing, memories of Tilly is her. She'd found like a moldy crab apple in the garden, coming back to dog's value, and she was just in her bed going, "Arr," giving Flicker the evil eye because Flicker was moving around. And she wouldn't have done that with any of the other dogs. She just did it with Amigo and Flicker. I have no idea why. So sometimes we get that in homes, don't we, as well, that we just can't understand why the dog's directing it to one individual. What it is, I don't know. They just don't like the cut of their jib or the way that they move around or any of those
And,
things.
and that's what I sort of meant by triggering. Not that someone will trigger that behavior on purpose, but just
Mm.
by moving towards the dog or near the object. And that can obviously start to trigger that emotional response. So they
Yes.
start wanting to give us the
Yeah,
growl.
yeah, yeah. Yes, because it's socially mediated escape behavior. I'm not moving. You're gonna have to. Like, get away from my stuff, man. Um, so
Which is,
it's that, isn't it?
yeah, which is very similar to the human thing, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not moving, so I'm going to put more locks on my door.
Yes.
Yeah,
And you're gonna have to change your behavior
yeah.
because I'm enjoying my stuff here.
So how does one, before we even touch on that, so if we can inadvertently trigger such a response, is there anything else? Like, does the gut play a part as well and hunger?
So much, yeah. Because obviously these factors increase the value of certain things. In fact, actually, speaking of Amigo, he went on a course of steroids. He'd had an ear infection, and he went on a course of steroids, and he was very thirsty, and so he was guarding the water bowl. So sometimes those internal conditions, not sometimes, will clearly affect what's a dog is guarding. And there's not very much scientific evidence yet, but there is that link between gut disorders like Giardia and resource guarding and not just food. Like you would kind of think, okay, well, I'd expect that. When Tilly got diabetes later in her life, I think she was hungry, but she didn't want to eat as quickly, or so she was longer at a bowl and she was more growly at people. Like, I'm not finished yet, I'm not done. So she was more growly there with diabetes. But I think we expect that to be normal with like, okay, steroids make you more thirsty, so it's natural you'll guard the water bowl. And if you've got gut disorders and you've got indigestion and so on, and maybe you've got diseases that make you want to eat but not able to eat, or tooth pain or whatever, um, whatever part of the digestive system is ailing you, we'd expect that to be food guarding, but it's not always. Um, and I think sometimes we've got that kind of like fear of being jostled or stability, but it is very rare that I have a resource guarding case where there aren't concurrent health issues. Very, very rare.
It's interesting you mentioned being jostled.
Yes.
And that brings me back to times when I've been in pain.
Yeah.
So um, pain can also possibly be a part of one of the reasons why we protect even more.
Every level. Yeah. I mean, if you just think about it, you get, say, a splinter in your finger, it sets off an inflammatory soup of all kinds of processes, but one of them is substance P. So substance P is then floating around your body, but one place that there's a lot of both the cells that produce substance P and the neurons that produce substance P, and then the receptors of that is in the amygdala, which is also involved in how we respond to situations emotionally. So just one single chemical from, like, say, a splinter is making you have more chemicals, making you more sensitive to everything that happens in your body and to the stimuli outside in the world that can do that. And substance P also part of chronic pain. So we're finding out more and more and more. And what we're getting from the science is, oh, that as well. Oh, that chemical as well. Oh, that neurotransmitter as well. Oh, that hormone as well. That are part and parcel of that inflammatory soup. That whenever we've got an acute injury or a chronic injury, are interacting slightly differently with different parts of the brain that are then making it easier for us to sensitize to whatever's happening in our body, but also what's happening in the environment as well.
So it's important that we um, never rule that part of it out, that it's a possible
Really. Yeah.
pain causing this
Yeah.
as well. Um, how does one, I mean, we talk about, I always believe if we change our behaviors, dogs can help to change theirs. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can make their life easier. Thus, we don't get stressed because we might not, because we're not triggering responses that are not desirable. How do people change behaviors?
I think one of the best things that I do with my clients who've got dogs who resource guard things from them. I mean, that's the first question is the dog guarding things from the humans in the household or the other dogs? And it can be or other dogs or other or cats as well, or other household animals. Um, is if it's directed at the human, that's much easier to change what the humans are doing sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. So sometimes our habits are so ingrained, and especially if we're dealing with young children who don't have good impulse control themselves yet, um, parents are going to have to do a bit more work on the whole management side of things. Um, so whether it's management, whether it's modifying our own behavior, whether it's helping the dog or cat modify their behavior. And that can be really hard because it's actually not a feeling so much about the resource. That only acts as a motivating operation for makes the other animal approaching you more likely to trigger you growling, barking, snarling, snapping, staring, whatever it is that you're doing to make them go away. So the resource itself is just motivating the next stage. So for me, I'm working on, okay, so how can we help us humans um, do things differently in terms of those approach behaviors? But also, the hard bit is how can we help animals do that as well? Which that's been fun because there's very little on dog to dog resource guarding either in the literature. There's lots on dogs who guard things from humans and then not so much on the dogs who guarding things from other dogs.
Yeah, and when we're looking at the things, that could be a multiple of things.
Completely.
Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
talking about, or I've been picturing, we're just talking about dogs that are protecting one thing. But what about those that protect multiple things in a household?
That's where I think we need that observation. So I generally go down the route of having three things that I look at. Tangibles are the one that come mostly to mind. So those would be physical stuff like food bowls, food itself, chews, toys, shoes, the stuff, the physical stuff. But I also think we forget sometimes about dogs who don't like being interrupted from the activities that they're enjoying by themselves. Like I'm thinking of my sister coming in my bedroom when I was doing my colouring in when I was a kid. It was like, get out of here! You're just wrecking my. You just your very presence is offensive to me, and you're interrupting my enjoyment of my privilege of being able to colour in my bedroom alone. So I do know that there are dogs who seem, I guess, people might say they're kind of like guarding a smell or they're guarding like the agility ring or whatever it is that they're doing. They're like, I'm not sharing. I don't want you to your approach. It makes me have to share my attention on you to keep an eye on what you're doing, and I can't enjoy the thing I was doing before you arrived. So activities are quite a significant one that I've seen some dogs who just don't like. Oh, just leave me alone. I'm doing my stuff. And then interactions are the other one. And people often think that the dog is protecting them, whereas in fact the dog's just like, I don't want to share the interaction I'm having with you. Like who would feel comfortable if we are in a relationship with another person and that other person then says, "Okay, I fancy a throuple." That's got to be in a very carefully negotiated conversation. It's not just like you can bring some randomer off the street, is it? And start enjoying sharing your partner about. And then we're kind of like, "Oh, my dog doesn't want to share me. Does your husband?"
Yeah.
Because maybe he does. Maybe he does. Maybe he's fine with that. Great. Good for him. And we're moving into a society in which more of those things are acceptable these days. But we would not feel if somebody said, no, I really don't want to participate in any kind of swinging scenario or throttling or whatever else, I think most people would go, that's understandable. That, you want exclusive interactions with your husband or your wife or your partner, and you don't want to share. I think that would go without saying that we would accept that. And yet how many of us are, my dog doesn't want my husband to sit down. Okay. And that's another one. How many dogs feel uncomfortable about us sharing our time with technology and with the TV? And then develop some weird kind of behaviors around that, about having to share our attention with other individuals, but that also interactions might also be technological interactions with gaming systems, with televisions, with smartphones, with even stuff that we're doing in the kitchen, whatever we're doing, that a dog might have feelings about that, which I don't think many people would all think, oh, um, that seems understandable now. I get that.
The more we're talking and we're looking at a multitude of things, it can
Mm.
be very, very, very stressful then for not only the dog, but for the human living in a home where they are not
Yes.
quite sure what's going to happen next.
Yes. Yeah.
The sofa, the bed, underneath the table, the chair,
Yeah.
uh, certain part of the lounge or the kitchen. Um,
Yes.
so, how, how does one cope? What can people do apart from getting in a very good behaviourist, obviously?
Yeah.
Um,
I think we can often identify the groups of things that dogs bother about. So good observation to me, safe observation, because obviously observation in a household that's not safe for people to do that observation is hard. But identifying where what's going on. So often in the past, I would have rushed into, okay, let's get management in place. Because I think one of the things that I wasn't always aware of in the past was how much of this is frustration-based behavior. And so often the dogs are very intolerant of being frustrated or being states of frustration. Um, rather than it necessarily being fear-based. So the frustration is with, would you stop approaching me? I'm trying to enjoy my thing, or the potential of enjoying the thing, and that bothering me. And there's a lot of frustration in there. So I used to just dive straight into management, whereas I don't do that anymore before I've done a frustration assessment and really thought about how that dog copes with frustration. Because it's all very well to say, let's like slam in some stair gates and slam in some X pens, and that could also cause more frustration. So I'm a little bit more careful now, especially where there's high levels of violence and a number of bite incidents, about introducing management straight away, which probably sounds counterproductive. You're like, slam the management in, let's make sure this can't happen again. But we forget that management can contribute to that feeling of frustration as well, and give a dog a more clear territory in which those resources occur. So that can then be a secondary problem that the dog, like I was working with a dog the other week, and we'd worked on the dog's feelings about the bowl. They didn't like the person approaching the bowl. That's fine. We can work on that. But they also had feelings about the kitchen. And so being in the kitchen itself started again, it was a motivating factor in why they then felt that they were going to guard the bowl. Putting a baby gate on the kitchen is good to remind the human not to go to while near the dog is eating, but actually they'd done that and it had made things worse, because then when they opened the baby gate, even if the dog had long since finished, the dog had got issues about, well, this is the kitchen feelings, and the baby gate made that even worse. So I tend to sometimes front load a bit of frustration stuff and building some frustration tolerance and helping the dog rebuild a lot of the time their relationship with the resource that they're guarding and the individual against whom they're guarding that resource. So I like to sometimes put some of those things in that help people rebuild their relationship a little bit with their dog and their dog with them in terms of approaching each other. Because it ends up a lot of people are then scared, aren't they? Like, I'm
Mhm.
scared to approach my dog. And my dog's scared. And I was like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure if I spoke to your dog, they'd say they were scared of you approaching them as well. And all of this frustration and this need for change. And there can be quite a lot of negativity in that, can't there? So sometimes I've been front loading things that look nothing to do with resource guarding, just helping the animal and the human and the individual feel comfortable around each other again and start to feel safe. I don't think we can start to deal with problems sometimes until we've got a little bit of safety to
Mhm.
shape, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. So
it
I
does.
do quite a lot of front ending the safety work these days. And then often the resource guarding disappears and we never have to work on it, which is a bonus.
I'm so glad you mentioned frustration because we tend to just jump in with the label resource guarding, and like you
Mm.
said, throw in the management. Let's do this. Let's do that.
A lot of conditioning straight away, and often it's ineffective.
you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Um, so changing behaviour is also because it's always put my teeth in again. It is like changing an approach where we're now thinking more slowly, acting more slowly, but also really
Yes,
taking into consideration how is that dog really feeling? Am I
yes,
frustrating the dog that's triggering the response?
yes, yeah.
Kids, children. Um, I have worked with in homes where we've got lots of kids, and it's a absolute disaster zone.
Mm.
Yeah, management's in place, but the dog is still uncomfortable with all this movement and kids playing. How on earth do you manage that?
I think those tend to be the situations where I think I really that I have to be the eyes on the ground there and see what's going on. Um, because a lot of times I think those kind of like, I don't know, the craziness of those situations can sometimes be challenging. Um, Management, of course, is going to have to be a factor there.
Mhm.
So how can we, mm, do some small things in order to help the dog accept that, and have a little bit of space from those children? Because often they've got kind of, I don't know about you, I find that they've often got quite complex relationships with the children. Like they'll
Yeah.
play sometimes with the children. Like there's quite a lot of ambivalence in those relationships. There's quite a lot of play and free for alls, but then there's also the guardian and the children don't understand that what's going on, and neither does the dog. So that for me, I tend to think that sometimes working on those boundaries for the children and the dog can help just relieve some of that tension. But that can be very hard in households where because some people just don't like living with lots of boundaries in their relationships, do they? And clear times of respecting that this is my time and that's your time, and and have different feelings about that. So often I can find that it's the way that the parents feel about the need for boundaries and whether they can manage that. And I have to say those are some of the hardest cases where the grown-ups, the adults, don't see the need to protect the dog and to protect their children. I find that very hard because they want that kind of, or they don't enjoy having boundaries in their relationships. And I totally understand that. That's not how I live and how I was brought up. But I understand that people have kids who crawl into their beds at 2 in the morning, whereas I only got go back to your bedroom, And we had that very much with our dogs when we were small. Like the dogs, they sleep there and you sleep there, and you don't have the dog in the bed, and you don't eat unless you're at the table, and the dog is not in the space where you're eating. And if the dog's toys are the dog's toys, and your toys are the dog's are your toys, and it was very clear for the dog and the children. My mum was a childminder, and had a red cocker spaniel in this around those children, but there were very clear boundaries. Whereas I think that's just one way of living, isn't it? And I find it harder with parents who live in different ways than I'm used to, and navigating that about how we create some boundaries so that it isn't as conflicted for the dog, when that may be against the wishes of the guardian. And those can be really difficult situations because often they also have bought what seem to be good family dogs, cocker spaniels, golden retrievers, and those good family dogs are often dogs who struggle with resource guarding. And so you know that's really tough. Or also dogs who struggle with pain. The number of dachshunds in homes with small children, where those dachshunds have got a lot of intervertebral disc disease, and
Yes.
just everyone's going, oh, like dachshunds are snappy, chihuahuas, and you're just like, these dogs they've got horrible health. And then when you're struggling with the children. So sometimes I think that we can treat those medical things, but a dog has to be respected ultimately. And that behavior is telling us that they need that respect. So for me, those are hard conversations with parents who would parent in different ways than I might, which are, you know, different but equal.
So would you, um, you know, ask clients to go have a good vet check, physical check, bloods? Let's look at and rule anything in or rule it out.
Yeah.
Does medication play a part sometimes?
Yes, absolutely. And that can include behavioral medication as well, sometimes. So a lot of that observation that we'll do at the beginning is also me helping them gather information to share with their vet as well.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit about handling issues, but many of these dogs are dogs who also struggle with being handled. And so, and struggle with medical issues because they've got that nice little triangle, haven't we? So sometimes I felt like we've needed to do a bit of work to even get to the point where we can get the dogs to a vet properly. Um, but they're often not the resource guarders, which is good. So yeah, good health check. And often once the pain is managed, if the pain can be managed, because that's not always a conversation we want to have. We think there are medical solutions for everything, and it's not
Mhm.
always the case. And I think we also forget that pain teaches, doesn't it? Like I had a fall like 3 or 4 years ago down the steps at the front, and we were very icy, and it changed my behaviour. I no longer feel that pain, but I walk down those steps differently, and if it looks like this might be a slight frost, I'm incredibly cautious on those steps. And so we forget that there are so many learned elements towards pain that sometimes we almost doing like a bit of occupational therapy afterwards to help the dogs learn how to be different in situations that would have previously been situations where they guarded stuff.
Yes, the environment holds so much that sometimes we can't think of everything. We can't exhaust everything. So, would I be right in saying if we are living with a dog who is, I like the label resource guarding, frustrated due to what's going on in the environment, changing the environment would help?
It can, but I think, well, number one, it doesn't teach the dog anything. And
Mhm,
number two, that it's not the problem. The problem is the other individual approaching.
mhm,
And so that's the thing I generally work on is, can I change how the dog feels about being approached? And can I change if changing the environment would look like, can I change the way that people or dogs or cats or whoever else the target is of the behavior? Can we change what they're doing so it doesn't cause, because so often when we manage the resources, and I found this with Tilly, that we just remove all of the things that potentially cause a problem. So, and then they start. Tilly guarded a moldy bread roll once.
mhm.
There was no rhyme nor reason to the food items that she would guard from another dog. So I can't manage that, and I can't. There's a dog that I work with, a lovely Weimaraner, who was guarding leaves in the garden. Um, you know, how do you manage all
Yeah.
of those? You can't. What you can manage is the approach behaviors and how the animal feels about that. So it actually makes the problem a whole lot smaller because we're just working on one facet. So it doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter. What I need to do is almost build up. And so I quite often will, when I do know roughly the different, if there are different things that they're guarding, to have like a pyramid system of red stuff that we're going to introduce like last, and orange stuff and green stuff. And can we help the dog feel safe whilst being approached with the green stuff, with the orange stuff, and working our way up through the pyramid? And building in respectful places for that. So I'm quite a big fan of using safety cues so that the dog knows that they absolutely will not be approached if the safety cue is in place. So, for instance, that might be a mat. Having a mat down means that if the dog is on the mat, no one will go near them. And that's I've done that with many dogs actually, is teaching the other dog, the one who's the target of the behavior, if that guy's on the mat, you go on your mat and you get good stuff, and that's fine. But you don't pester them when they're on their mat. So if you see that dog on their mat, you use that as a cue to do your own behavior. And that's been incredibly effective. Introducing those kind of like safety cues in that kind of a way that tell the dogs very clearly that, oh, if I go here, I won't be bothered. And for dogs who I've worked with where it's guarding against human beings, where the dog's gone and taken themselves to that place, and it's then a very clear signal, I'm not to be interfered with. And then they get to practice the behavior, because that's one of my problems with the environmental management approach, is it just removes all of the resources from the dog's life. So then what do they have in life that's to be enjoyed?
Mhm.
And so their life gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it doesn't resolve their feelings about things or about being approached. And then they're also spending more time in without that kind of like optimism of life and the joys of life and the pleasures of life. So I don't really want to remove those objects and items and relationships and activities from the dog's life because they're really valuable to the dog. I'd rather work on how they feel about being approached by whomsoever that might be, including the household cat.
But that is a really, really good way of thinking, and a really good way of going about your work. You're right, changing the environment is not going to change the dog's mindset.
Mm.
We're just, yeah, I totally get that. What about then? If we've got, I suppose changing the environment would work if it's just one item the dog is having an issue with. I suppose that's easy peasy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely 100% on it when you're saying if we're looking at dogs that resource guard multiple things, how on earth are you going to change that?
You can't. Yeah.
It's very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
The dog that is resource guarding the leaves, we don't let them in the garden anymore.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or they were going out and patrolling the garden for leaves, and then want to blow over by the time they got back in and tried to let the dog out.
So it's a very difficult behaviour to actually live with. But what you're saying is we can make it much more easier by working with the dog as opposed to taking away from the dog.
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Because I'm very much about, okay, so how can I construct and build things for the dog and build behaviors rather than limit behaviors? Like what flowers can we plant? What can we help the dog flourish with? What and
Mhm.
so on. So, and again, there can be often a relationship between because dogs don't do it to everybody. Tilly never ever guarded anything from me. And there was a kind of like, not because she was scared or anything like that, but because there was that degree of trust. I know you won't steal anything from me. You're a trustworthy individual and you're not wandering around and I have to keep my eye on you and I can't enjoy my thing,
Mhm.
So what I did was predictable and safe, and that helped her feel predictable and safe. So a lot of it is about creating that kind of predictability. And I've often found when it's dog to dog resource guarding, often I've not worked with the resource guarding dog at all. I've only ever worked with the dog who's the target because they're often doing things that are annoying.
Right. That
And
does.
and it's not their fault that they're annoying, but they're annoying the pants off the other dog. And I think that other dog, sometimes those behaviors resolve themselves when the other individuals just stop being so annoying. And building that relationship up again. Because if you feel uncomfortable about people moving around your stuff or dogs moving around your stuff, um, that often you don't have a good relationship, do you, with that individual, which is really sad. And so I think for me, a lot changes where they start to feel more comfortable with each other again.
A little while ago, you mentioned a method that you use, which is similar to having a signal of interaction or signal of non-interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely brilliant.
It's made a real difference. There was a study, I think 2020. It's from the Netherlands, and I think yeah, I know I can't even remember, but they started the maybe it's 2018, I think so. And it's about the use of safety cues with dogs who've got conflict in the home. And they used them at. And after that, I was just like, yeah, I can see how that would work. That if you're on your special place, you get not to be interfered with. And if you want to be interfered, sometimes I've used two mats. That's your safe mat. If you don't want to be interfered with, then that's your mat where you do, you want interaction. Um, I've got a little dog I'm working with at the moment, and they're such wonderful guardians. That dog really didn't like being handled, sometimes not very guardy. But we're introducing the idea of that's your safe mat. Nobody will pest you if you're on there. This is your mat to ask me to pet you.
Right.
Because there was a lot of the dog was sometimes soliciting contact, and the guardian was scared of giving it because quite often he would bite her. And so we being able to teach him just those two things. Yes, this is your yes mat, that's your no mat. And the dog's like, this is fine. I get it. Which I'm just like, that's amazing. That's your boudoir. You're in there and we leave you alone. And this is your I'd like interaction, please. and I'm feeling in the mood.
Lastly, have you ever found that certain breeds come to the fore more than others? Where we're
I,
talking about protecting
we
stuff.
we were talking about gun dogs, but it depends what your class of how you class resources, I guess. Because, like for me, I think territorial behavior can be a part of that, and that goes across the canine spectrum, doesn't it? I've seen Bichons who was territorial, as Patus, like Grand Pyrenees. Everyone can be territorial. So I think it depends, but gun dogs do seem to be. But I do think we have different views of gun dogs. I'm not necessarily sure it's that gun dogs have got genetically, a genetic factor of being resource guarders, but Cocker Spaniels are often treated like little dogs. I had this conversation with somebody who has a Chihuahua who's resource guarding things from them. I said, "What would you do if your dog was a Rottweiler?" Not because Rottweilers are aggressive, because you
Mhm.
can't lift a Rottweiler and hold a Rottweiler's collar. You know, if that Rottweiler's decided it wants something, you're not going to stick your hands in its mouth, are you? Because if you did, I have words for you. So I think Cocker Spaniels are often treated as if they are lap dogs, and they have opinions about that. Um, and Golden Retrievers is the other one that I tend to find quite a lot of resource guarding in that is unexpected for the Guardians. But I'm not entirely sure they're doing anything that's different than any dog might. I think we have different views about those dogs and how they should expect humans to and other dogs to interact with them. Oh, they're super friendly. They don't, they're family dogs. And I think that view is unhelpful because when we start thinking of them as dogs rather than family dogs, and would we still do the same behaviors with a Malinois, with a Rottweiler, with a German Shepherd, with any big dog breed of choice? Just the size is important there. Would we still do that with them? And I don't think we would, you know, I think our behavior would change comparing one of those dogs to a golden retriever compared to, say, a mastiff. We'd be like, I'm going to leave my mastiff to chew my shoes and not leave my shoes down on the floor. Whereas a golden retriever, our first thing is like, I'm just going to go and retrieve my shoes from my golden retriever's mouth. And then my golden retriever has got opinions about it. So I wonder if there's that as well as a factor that we think those dogs are great family dogs and we can, we're a little bit less respectful of them being dogs.
Emma, it's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. If anyone wanted to make contact with you to hire your service, how would they contact you? Where would they find you?
They find me in lots of places. So I'm lighting up dog training, but I'm also a Woof like to meet. So Woof like to meet is for dogs in rescue and dogs in shelters and people fostering and so on, and lighten up. So those two ways are probably the best ways to find me.
Everybody, please hit that subscribe button. Don't miss anything that we put out. And it's goodbye from myself until the next time, as well as goodbye from Emma. Thank you.